Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar video. This is going to be my next Legacy of Yangchen chapter analysis video. This one will be for chapter 23, which is called Circumstantial Evidence. So the kind of chapters we've been waiting for here, we get to the island where the unanimity kind of training happened. We ultimately, over the course of these next couple of chapters, get reveals that it's more than just about combustion bending, but do we actually get enough explanation on combustion bending, why the project actually happens? And the answer ultimately is probably not really. I haven't really seen too many people kind of be like super incredibly happy about the level of detail we got about some of this stuff. It's not bad, like it's not like an absolute failure on the book, but compared to, I think, people's expectations in terms of like what the heavy speculation was coming into this book, the detail that we came out with, I think, is probably unsatisfying overall. But let's get into this and kind of go through it here, because this chapter, like, obviously there's another one after this that kind of covers more of the details, but it's kind of short. Like, considering we have had chapters that are like, 14, 15 pages, there's been one or two of them that are like 18 pages for specific character scenes. The idea that like this is only like a kind of 8-9 page chapter is kind of a bit weird, and it kind of shows you a little bit how skewed at times, that page count allowance can be. And also that it really does feel that they were very kind of protective over what information they were revealing versus not. And I would really like to know, are there cut chapters from this book that go into more detail when it comes to Chai-Si origins, and especially around this section of the book with the further details being presented. But yeah, we'll jump in here. So they're kind of discussing what's their approach going to be here, because they bring up the idea that what if the place is just crawling with combustion benders? What do we do then? Like, we can't really land, so we can't do a big flyover because we'll just make ourselves a target from potentially multiple combustion benders on the ground. So they decide on a low approach, really close to the water, and just kind of landing and kind of sneaking in. Now, they kind of note that like it doesn't seem like there's a lot of activity on the island, so it goes from being exceptionally cautious at the start landing here to kind of becoming a little bit more open as they realize that the place does seem to be just like absolutely abandoned. There's already not much on the island, but the few kind of huts and kind of buildings doesn't seem like there's anyone around. So that's the kind of core idea here. Nujian is told to kind of stay back, and Yangchen leads them up front because she has the best sort of senses with her airbending. She can kind of sense the kind of flow of the landscape a little bit better with how the wind blows. And Kavik and Jujinta are very much like on guard, like knives are out. Kavik's got the water ready to go in case they are attacked anywhere, because they are aware they could encounter a combustion bender hiding somewhere here at any point. A point is made here about like Jujinta's getting a bit worried. He doesn't get a good sense from this place. Are there spirits around here? But Yangchen says no vengeful beings on this particular island, and she's pretty sure about this overall. There's a little bit of a light-hearted moment here where they go past some birds and they are following Yangchen, and when she looks at them, they like land on her. And it's just Kavik having this funny moment, noticing that like, nature loves the Avatar here. And he says, don't worry, I won't tell Pick and Pack you've been cheating on them. And the journey kind of rolls on. So there's a clearing up ahead. This is where she notes the wind blows differently, so they kind of move up ahead. This is where they find some kind of huts, basically. And when they go inside, it's just this kind of small, basic bamboo hut. They're like, is it storage? Jujinta seems to confirm it's barracks, actually. So as we kind of got from, I think, a chapter or two ago, the goods that were being sent to this island were the absolute kind of basics to survive. So there's basically beds set up here, basic kind of clothing, that sort of stuff. But it's very much just a place to kind of mass allow people to kind of stay here. And so they're already getting worried that, wait, if this if all of these people are combustion benders, this is a nightmare scenario here. Like, what if there are theoretically hundreds, like 100 combustion benders, but they just have to be like, no, there's no way that's the case. Like, if there's only 3 of them that we kind of know of, 1 at the moment, there's no way there's that much of a success rate with whatever this project is. Then they get into a kind of bigger building. This one is a double-length lodge. Nearby, there are kind of row of huts, and there's clearly an area in the center of this building that is like a training floor for fighters and benders to practice. On the ground, they notice some kind of broken pots and stuff like that, and inside is it's noted here. It's the ingredients for dit da jo, which is basically, hit medicine used to numb and toughen knuckles for punching. We'll later find out, I think it's important to probably note with some of these details here, is that they're encountering, I suppose, quite a bit of the chi blocking training that's going on here. That is the ultimate kind of explanation for a lot of this stuff, because this doesn't seem to obviously line up with the combustion bending stuff that we know about. So this is the chi blocking stuff that we'll learn about a little later on. Kaveh kind of notes that this is a very like factory-like, facility here. This is not like people being, I suppose, super specially trained. It is, let's mass train a lot of people to learn a specific skill without really caring too much about them. That seems to be the idea here. Output is the focus, not on, a Sifu kind of training their students type thing. Jujinta then finds a scroll, and it is described as being a air nomad acupuncture map that has basically kind of like chi path kind of layouts on it for the hands. And Yangchen is just like, wait, how does she have this? Like, I know Chaisi collects rare books, but, these should not be ever seen outside of an air temple. Like, that's how sort of specific and specialized that they are. Now, this is obviously part of the few explanations that they try to give here, which is that they really try and emphasize, I suppose, to a certain degree, that Chaisi and her reading and collecting rare books is part of why she knows how to do all of this. It is not a satisfying answer, because it's very unclear if that's what they're going for as like being the lone explanation for everything, or if it's just like part of it. But in this case, for the kind of chi blocking aspect of what's going on here, this makes sense that she gets these kind of diagrams, and that chi blockers need to know about the kind of energy system of the body to know where to chi block, and that is the kind of basic idea here. Now, to be fair, there is some element of chi flow involved, quite a lot of chi flow involved in combustion bending, but because it's focused here, this is an arm, I believe, that the diagram is of. They're not really focused like on here. Like the book doesn't particularly go into any detail about like kind of chi flow through the forehead for the most part. So that's that whole idea. So after this, they kind of head outside. They're looking for other buildings. They have to go further, like into like the jungle here, and it's like pretty hot and stuff like that. They follow a very kind of minor trail kind of through the jungle. Like they note that like it twists and turns, that like if you stop for a second, you'll lose track of completely where you are. Then they come out and basically they find this giant kind of black stone building off in the distance, and it's clear something is going on here. It's like giant blocks of hardened lava rose higher than a taku apartment, and it's noted that in an otherwise kind of quite natural area, this giant kind of black building really stands out compared to everything else. And it's really clear, the sort of idea, like avoid the shoals, stay clear of the pits, do not go near the black building, or like the rules of the island that they almost get. But Yangchen is like, we need to go in there. So they look for the door. What they find is that it is a tiny door that basically when you open it up, you effectively have to crawl in. It is not a huge entrance. And the question comes up, why doesn't it have a full-size door? And Jujinta is the one to answer, because you don't want anything to escape. Light, sound, people. And it's like, perhaps the Avatar should wait outside, but no, she heads straight in. Kavik is kind of like, maybe you should just effectively destroy this whole building. Maybe shake it out instead to avoid us having to actually go in. But she's just like, no, we need to see what's inside. Then we actually get in here, and now effectively what you need to be thinking of here, the book I don't think makes it particularly clear. Think about the brainwashing is kind of what you need to be thinking of here, because when I go through this, you'll note that like it is really not made very clear what you are meant to take from this. I think it is probably one of the worst sections in the book when it comes to just the text communicating to the reader what the takeaway actually is. So anyway, they kind of all crawl in one by one. It opens up, of course, it's a larger room on the inside. It's dark, of course. Yangchen's using firebending to create a little bit of light. There is a mounted torch on the wall, so she lights that up. And then we get the room. There doesn't seem to be anything else in the room except for a large pile of scrap metal in the center. So what is revealed to be here is iron hoops in assorted sizes. Some of the rings were only as big around as a pumpkin, and others were so large they'd been broken down into quarters to fit through the tunnel. While they'd been tossed into the heap without care, like a collection of cheap mangles, Kavik noticed the pieces could have been arranged in a continuous line from smallest to largest without duplicates. They're all like, what's this about? Like, this looks like a cooper, searching for the ideal barrel size through trial and error. Yangchen searches through them here, and it says here, buried under the metal was a cloth-covered object, probably a chair, judging by the shape. Yangchen began to pull the rings off and throw them into the corner, pausing only to examine her hands with distaste. They're greasy. Kavik helped her. The iron was indeed slippery with animal fat, as if pieces had to slide against a moving component. Once the last ring had been pushed aside, he wiped his hands on a corner of the cloth before yanking it away. So we have a bit of a kind of weird situation. What's all this kind of metal rings, hoops? What's this about? There's a chair just here. So he pulls it off, and it says here, he needed a moment to fully comprehend the object he just unveiled. Oh no, Kavik murmured. No, no, no. It was indeed a chair, but the feet were bolted to the floor. The legs, armrests, and back had leather restraints to fit around the body of the occupant. The seats had been stained dark by foulness. The ends of the arms were grooved and splintered where fingernails had gouged into the wood. Kavik retched, and Yangchen tells him to leave. He goes outside. Jujinta follows shortly. He coughs when he gets outside. Yangchen then comes outside shortly afterwards, and literally just, boom, earth bends this place into the ground. Like, she just destroys this building. And there's just this sense of evil. They destroyed something like evil here, and she wanted it gone. Kavik agreed. Certain evils needed to be buried and never disturbed again. So we have to go back. What was that about? Because it's like, okay, the rings, the hoops, the chair, and that's the big problem here, is that, like, you'll note in the description, it doesn't mention, like, blood. It's not like they found, like, bodies, body parts, gore necessarily. The word foulness is used, which, I don't know, like, I suppose that could technically mean blood, but I think the book would make it a little clearer if that's what they were going for here. Whereas I think the foulness is more meant to be the idea of people were restrained, and it's more referring to waste, basically, human waste effectively here. That's what they, I think, mean by this. But the reaction from everyone here doesn't feel like it's just like, this smells bad, kind of bad stuff happened here. It is very dramatic and over the top. And it's so unclear about what's going on here. Whereas I think most people's initial interpretation of this scene is probably like, oh, they've walked into basically a torture chamber. And that's what their reaction is here. They bury it because it's a torture chamber that's just meant to hurt people. But then you realize the details of the scene, and, like, again, they don't mention blood. Wait, what sort of a torture thing is just a chair and a bunch of iron hoops? Because, again, it mentions here, like, the chair. it has restraints on it, so you get locked into the chair. But it doesn't describe that there's any like crazy violent thing going on inherently with the chair. And then like the iron hoops is just kind of like, what's going on here? And then you realize, wait, there was something mentioned earlier on in the book, and that is the brainwashing. And so you're immediately like, oh, okay, this is what they're going for here. And I'm pretty sure this is what the intent is actually meant to be. The Dai Li brainwashing, but specifically the metal structure that the light is going around on. And it's like, it's probably the part of this scene that people focus on the least, because you're almost like, you almost forget that that is actually there in that scene. But clearly that's what's being described here. The metal iron hoops that they find here in assorted sizes, some of them small, others had been broken down into quarters to fit through the tunnel, which looks to be kind of like the size of this one, as you can sort of see here. So clearly what they've actually found here is the brainwashing room on the island. Again, we know from a bunch of chapters ago that Thapa and the other combustion benders have been brainwashed, and Thapa is particularly susceptible to it. So that explains a little bit, of course, but I've got to admit, I felt like a little bit of a genius when I realized this connection, because I don't think this is inherently obvious, that you are meant to think, see iron hoops written there, see the chair, and then go back to what we know of brainwashing from before in the franchise, and remember that the Dai Li used a metal frame to spin the light around on. Like, it's such a, like, small detail pick as, like, the true connection of this scene here. But then you go back and it's like, wait, okay, so it's a brainwashing chair and the hoops are for brainwashing. Why does Kavik be like, no, what is this? Why does he look at the chair and be like, no, I'm going to be sick? Why does Jujinta leave and effectively have a similar reaction? Why does Yangchen see the chair and think, I need to get rid of this? I get it. Brainwashing. Bad thing. But the characters act as if they've found like a pile of dead bodies in here. When it's a brainwashing thing, and then you'll note none of the characters in the scene say what their thoughts are on the situation. You just get a general sense of they're uncomfortable in there, they're disturbed by what they've seen, but no character ever once says what it is. Like it says here, Kavik, he needed a moment to fully comprehend the object he just unveiled. What have you comprehended about it? The chapter doesn't make it clear. And so I think there's a few things wrong with this. One, it's far too subtle, I think, of a detail, considering the brainwashing gets brought up in, I think, maybe like 3 chapters. The initial one with Thapa and Chai-Si, it gets basically brought up here. And then it will be at least alluded to later on in the book when Yangchen sees Thapa, and she notes that, like, whoa, he's out of it. Like, usually he'd be talking a lot, but he's not really. What's going on here? It's not made into a particularly, like, big thing. And now, obviously, there's a sense that they're going for here is obviously some research was happening here. Like, how big of a circle do you need to actually brainwash someone? Now, the Dai Li seem to have that figured out in the ATLA era, but this seems to be a bit of a research project here to figure it out. Now, obviously, that would suggest that they started off small, went to big, and that's where they settled on. Otherwise, like, would they not have even bigger structures? So that's kind of cool. And there is another little bit to bring in here, but it's almost like just as subtle as everything else. From the first book, Dawn of Yangchen, remember the books on Chai-Si's shelves. And remember, they've been referencing she has rare books. So, of course, the main takeaway from what we initially saw was, of course, Pearls of Lahima and the complete works of Shouken. And a lot of people kind of dismissed the 2 middle books. I've discussed that, like, I felt there was probably something to them because they seemed somewhat specific to what combustion bending could theoretically be. But the 2 middle ones, as you can see there, are Huiliu's 10 chapters on celestial circles and other artful mathematics. This is described as a treatise explained how to calculate the unending ratio between a circle's outside and its width using the arrow narrowing straight-sided shapes. So the details of circles and the significance of them, celestial circles, okay, that's fine. There's a connection here, iron hoops, circles. But it's probably the second book that's the more interesting one, where maybe in combination with the first, you can maybe see where some of this came from. So the flame in the mind, oscillations and harmonies, an old popular layman's compilation of techniques to assist in meditation from across the four nations. It described the incense and singing bowls of the air nomads, the flickering focus candles of the fire sages, the beat of the water tribe's drums, the wire brushes used in the earth kingdom to lightly strike the limbs and unlock chi paths. This was a common interest across the world in losing oneself with the help of light and sound and the senses. And of course, the brainwashing technique, at least that the Dai Li used, seems to be some combination of that. Having a kind of light go around, in a way, kind of flicker at a specific, oscillation around a specific kind of size of circle. While you say things to people and mess with their senses in like a dark room and stuff like that. You can see the connection that's kind of being made here in terms of like, okay, I get some of it, but it still doesn't inherently explain to you where inherently brainwashing, like, properly comes into this. Like, losing oneself with the help of light and sound is like, okay. But again, there's not a particularly, like, origin story, like, as such here. And I don't really mind there not being an origin story for brainwashing in this book, because it almost seems to suggest that brainwashing is older than combustion bending. Whereas the reason I think that I have a little bit of a criticism about the combustion bending explanation is because these books are kind of meant to be the origin of combustion bending in the Avatar world, but they also treat it like just as vaguely. So there's interesting stuff here. Like, again, like, look at that candle in a jar going around in a circle. It definitely, that's what it's meant to be. But the characters in the scene just do not get the kind of point across particularly well, because none of the characters like mention brainwashing. None of the characters speak to each other in relation to what they've just seen and like say that like, oh, that's what that meant. This explains quite a bit. So that's, I think, the major problem with this chapter is that why so coy in this scene? Why is it written in this way to be so vague about this when this is in a way one of your big reveals, at least for this chapter? Like, this is kind of meant to be this big reveal for this chapter, is they found the brainwashing place. And then it's just not mentioned, like, at all. It's so frustrating why it's done in this way. And it makes me feel like, like, how many writing pass-throughs did this go through? Like, how did so multiple people read this and feel that they were kind of happy with this in the end? It's just not clear. Now, maybe that's just a case with FCE at times. He can be like that with the writing style, where you have to read a specific section a couple of times because he words it in a very weird or like flowery way that just kind of obfuscates what it's actually trying to get across. That's what feels like it happens here. That the characters' reactions lead you in one direction, but the details lead you in another direction. And it doesn't feel like there's particularly a crossover, where I think the characters should be a little bit more kind of talkative and thoughtful, discussing it, if they all know that it's a brainwashing kind of chamber here. Like, I don't think it's inherently like awful the way it's done. That, like, I can understand the characters reacting to just knowing that sort of quote unquote bad stuff happened here, and that it's a place that they want to get rid of, and it speaks to sort of crimes effectively that Chai-Si has committed. That if there's any proof that she has truly done something like wrong and terrible, it is the fact that she approved something like this to happen. That people get brought into this room and they're tortured to a certain degree, brainwashed, And it's all under Chai-Si's orders. Like, this is the lengths that she will go through to get what she wants. Now, the other takeaway is, of course, you don't quite get the full reveal here, but clearly, you know, chi blocking, a general sense of training more than just like some firebenders in a special technique. And we'll learn more about that in the next chapter, of course. But I don't know. I just find myself with this chapter like frustrated. And you'll note I said that about the previous chapter as well, with the whole Jujinta. But the Jujinta one, I think, is like, okay, fine, you didn't want to tell us that, that's fine. I can explain it away with just the you know, being kind of true to the character to a certain degree. Here, though, we are getting more into the, like, investigation type stuff. We've been building up to this for, like, 2 entire books to get to the truth about the project that is causing so many issues in the world. And you do it in this way that is vague. It relies on you to get anything from this scene to remember very specific details of scenes that are like that we only know about from like an event that is multiple eras into the future. And it's just like, come on, you have to make that clearer. And that's the thing, like when I posted my spoiler review and mentioned this in the comments that like, hey, what are your guys' thoughts on this scene? My initial thoughts were that like, wait, is this just torture chamber? What's going on here? But then when I realized like, oh, it's probably brainwashing, there was a bit of a kind of 50-50 thing of like if multiple people going like, ah, yes, I agree, didn't quite get that initially, but yeah, that is probably correct. And then other people thinking that like, but no, the character reactions don't really fit that. It's probably something different, but it has to be brainwashing. But I'm not fully sure. And I think that's kind of the problem here, is that is way too subtle of a detail there to try and get something from, in my mind. So gonna kind of end things there with this chapter. The atmosphere is good. You know, the core of the reveals is kind of interesting as we're getting closer to the big reveals. But it's just elements of frustration beginning to come in when it comes to these details of like, you needed to do one major thing right in this book and it feels like already there's problems and it's becoming an issue, you know, that sort of thing. But yeah, in the comments, let me know what your thoughts are in this chapter. But that has been the video. Thanks for watching and bye.